Hey gang, I am Joe Edelman and welcome to the 98th episode of The Last Frame Live. Tonight I've got some news, announcements, a shot breakdown, and of course the photography Q&A. So come on, you're here. Start typing. Even if you just want to whine about the fact that DP Review is gone. I'll tell you my thoughts. You may not like them, but I'll share them. And of course I'll do my best to answer all of your questions in the next 60 minutes. So how can I help you tonight? If you're watching live, you know the drill. Please leave me a note in the chat. Let me know who you are, where you're watching from. And if you're watching that replay, no worries. Please drop a comment below the video. Let me know you are here. Already tonight, live, we've got Jeffrey out in Washington State, Keith in the south of France, Lynn in New York. I got Jim down in Maryland, Nick in Maryland, Robert down in... Robert, where are you at? Texas or New Mexico? It's New Mexico, I think it is. David in San Diego. Lane is in Indiana. Let's see, we got Jay in Southern Colorado. Calvin up in New England. Joe Dussel, Vista, California. Alvin in Virginia. And Danny from Las Vegas. And who else just snuck in here? I got Michael here from Overton, Texas. Look, all of you are part of a growing global community of photographers in over 100 countries who tune in each week to watch The Last Frame Live. And for that, I will work really hard to help you with your photography in the next 60 minutes. And of course, it would help a lot more people find out about The Last Frame. Do me a solid, just hit that thumbs up. It requires very little effort. The more thumbs up, the more YouTube recommends the video. It's that simple, okay? And of course, while you're down there, feel free to hit that share button. Let your photography friends know that we are streaming live on YouTube right now. You can share the link lastframe.live or hit that button. Facebook, Twitter, fastest ways to get the word out. So just in case you don't pay attention to any of the photography news, in which case I would actually say maybe you're the smart one. But if you do, you couldn't miss it. DP Review, it's done. So a lot of you don't realize that DP Review, number one, a bunch of years back, was sold to Amazon, which great for the people that own DP Review. And that was back when Amazon was kind of really in a buying phase. They bought Internet Movie Database. They bought Internet Wayback Machine. They bought up a lot of stuff, and DP Review was one of them. And DP Review was kind of like a two-headed monster, in my opinion. So full disclosure, let me say straight up, I honestly... for years, I avoided DP Review like the plague because DP Review, for me, doing all the YouTube stuff, that was like having to go through the dark forest at night where all the trolls live, right? The forums on DP Review, I don't care what anybody's excuse is, it was inexcusable. The people that run DP Review, they should have shut that crap down a long, long time ago. There was nothing good about those forums for the photography industry. It's a bunch of middle-aged and older, mostly males, just bitching and pissing and moaning and griping. Useless. Just taking up space and taking up air. That's how I feel about that. Now, on the other hand, there's the camera review side. DP Review was honestly a great source, and I would say about as unbiased as you could get when it came to camera reviews. Please understand, all of these websites, you know, Petapixel, DP Review, F-Stoppers, all of them, they get a lot of favors from the camera companies, right? They get to go on trips. They get gear long before the rest of us have it. So it's impossible for them to be completely unbiased, in large part because they can't do their jobs without the cooperation of the camera companies. And I'm not making them out to be bad, like good for them, right? But unbiased to the extent that it's very unlikely they're ever going to completely trash a camera if it deserves to be trashed, right? So anyway, DP Review is going away next month, and it's going away. Amazon is taking all the content. They're shutting it down. The folks at DP Review are trying to find ways to archive a lot of it now. I'm going to go back and I'm going to read some of the comments about it that are on here. I haven't had a chance to read them yet, so I'll see what you guys had to say. You know, for me, I don't think it's a big loss that it goes away. I will say one of the potential positives that are going to come from it, and it's the only thing that I actually appreciated about DP Review, and that is that Petapixel was very smart, jumped on it right away, and they're kind of picking up the scraps, and they are going to continue under their brand, the Chris Nichols and Jordan Drake YouTube channel, right? So they'll be now doing their thing for Petapixel, and they're already promising that they're going to make some changes, do some cool new stuff. I do feel that their approach to doing camera reviews was practical. It was very consistent. Obviously, most of these YouTubers that are out there doing the gear reviews, they've got their favorite brands, which, they make no secret about that. But even when they get a hold of other brands, it's kind of, they're matching it against their favorite brand and that kind of stuff. I will give Chris and Jordan, a lot of credit, especially even when I was finishing up with Olympus and was looking to move back into Sony. I spent a lot of time going through their videos, both for camera bodies and lenses, because the best part of it is you go from video to video with them, they're very consistent in the way that they present the information and the way that they evaluate the cameras, etc. But I actually just found my notes here. DP Review was launched in 1998, so they're closing just shy of their 25th anniversary, right? They've been around for a long time. Owned by Amazon, as I mentioned, it's shutting down April 10th, and Amazon is just terminating. It's done. And of course, this is part of, the big layoffs that have been happening with all the tech companies. Amazon laid off 18,000 people earlier this year. So, hey, it is what it is. But for a guy who's kind of hardcore like me, again, good. It's one less place for people to hang out online and bitch and piss and moan and dream about being a photographer. You want to partake in photography, pick up the damn camera and take pictures. Stop all the yapping, right? That's my take. So some of the comments that did come in here, though, about it. Let's see. From Jay, disappointed that Amazon isn't even finding a buyer for DP Review. A lot of camera history being wiped out. And I'll be honest with you, Jay, I'm not surprised. And you know why? I don't think the site was making money. I don't think it was even close to making money. Even with the staff, I think I read the staff was about 12 people. I'd be shocked if that website was actually turning a profit at this point. So, in terms of finding a buyer, they're going to basically wind up giving it away. And you can't do that either. I would argue that for those people that find the value in DP Review. So again, obviously I line up on the side that I'm glad to see it go away. I'll own that, right? But I think for those people that find the value in it, I think you're going to see websites like Petapixel. I do know behind the scenes in recent years, Petapixel has done a lot to really shore up their kind of infrastructure in terms of how they're producing content, what they're producing. They've got a new executive editor. When I say new, he's been there probably a couple of years now, Jaron Schneider. I've written some articles for him along the way. I'm sure that he was probably a driving force behind picking up this YouTube stuff with Chris and Jordan. So I think that you're going to see sites like Petapixel step up and grab a lot of it. I'm confident, honestly, that you'll see F-Stoppers and DIYphotography.net really try and fill a little bit of that void. But, all in all, at the end of the day, the 12 people that were running that website, Amazon gave them a great opportunity. And again, the simple math says there's no way that thing was turning a profit. So they didn't do their job. And, Amazon's looking at it from a business perspective. So I don't really see it being that big a deal. What you kind of have to understand from the other side of the game, the camera manufacturers, they are going to make sure that there is an outlet like DP Review that they support, because they need those outlets to get the word out. Again, as I said before, understand DP Review was essentially in bed with every camera manufacturer and lens manufacturer out there. And I don't mean they were getting paid for the review. So let me be clear, no accusations of that, but they were getting free trips. They were getting gear way early, all that kind of stuff. So yeah, there's a little bit of back and forth that happens there. That's not going to go away. It's important for the camera companies to have an outlet like that, and I honestly think that that's what you see Petapixel doing, is they're kind of, you know, saying, hey, we're here, gang. We're going to take that spot. So I wouldn't stress too much for anybody yet. And look, I'm sorry, but we're not losing anything to see those forums go away. Not a thing. We're just not. From Robert, DP review forums were all too often full of noise and lazy questions and knee-jerk answers. They also fostered an obsession over gear, in gear over technique, but the loss of the community for so many is sad. Yeah, you know, Robert, I think that's actually a really good balanced opinion there. I don't disagree. From Jim, let's see. This was the first you heard about DP review shutting down. It's sad all those years of knowledge will just wink out of existence. Maybe. I don't know that there's so much knowledge that's going to disappear. You know, look, I get it. Please, let's be fair. So you send me hate mail another day, right? There are people, your joy in photography, it's the gear. I understand that. And while I do respect you, obviously that's not where I put my energy. I put my energy into the practice, you know, the doing, right? So that's why for me, it's kind of like, yeah, I'm just not seeing a big loss here, right? From Nick, forums made me crazy. Half the questions were, I like to take pictures. What camera should I buy? Yeah, welcome to my world. The other half were, you know, should I wait for the new model camera to come out? And of course, the answer to should I wait for the new model camera to come out is hell no. Buy one now and buy a new one as soon as it comes out. I mean, you know, really? Let's see. Were there any others here? Let's see. Michael Hampton. Will all that knowledge still be available on Wayback Machine? Not necessarily, Michael. Sites that are that large and that big, number one, I don't know how deep Internet Wayback Machine goes into them. And number two, oftentimes with discussion forum platforms, they can't archive that stuff properly. And trust me, we don't want to, because what will happen is the CSS files and that make those forums expand and contract and do all that kind of stuff, that's not going to work on the Internet Wayback Machine. So a lot of it will break. You know, you may see some of... you know, you may be able to read some of the pages and some of the reviews. Eventually, you'll run into problems with images showing and not showing. And my understanding is the plan is to also shut down the YouTube channel from DP Review as well. But again, like, why do we need a review from a camera that's 5 years old, 6 years old, 7 years old, 10 years old, 20 years old? We don't. Look, I understand there are some people, you know, from a historical significance, it might be nice to have that information. I hear you. And I don't disagree with you, but that information already exists. There's this bigger thing than DP Review. It's called the internet. If you type in the names of any of those cameras, you'll find all the information you're looking for in many, 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 many sources, right? So, you know, again, if you're the kind of person to spend a lot of time there, my sympathies to you, but I, you know, also will share my sympathies that your favorite place is going away. But I for one, do not mourn the loss at all, especially not knowing that Chris and Jordan are going to be moving over to Petapixel, still doing their camera reviews. Their reviews, as far as I'm concerned, hands down, the best hands-on reviews that you can find on YouTube. I've never met them. I don't know them. I have no allegiance to them, but I personally have used them as a resource when researching gear. Even when I was, you know, working through the process of, do I buy Sony lenses? Do I buy Sigma lenses? Do I buy Tamron lenses? I watched a ton of their videos comparing the brands, looking at their notes on the different releases and that. So again, for people that aren't just drooling over gear and dreaming about gear, but people that are really interested in functional equipment and is it going to work and is it going to meet my needs, and are looking at it from a dollars and cents standpoint, hands down, these guys were the best. So beyond the rest of the site, no loss. So anyway, that being said, also news this week, since my buddy Joe Douzel's here, I gotta share this one. Rico Pentax has announced again, but reassuring us it's coming, They are working on developing a new 35mm film camera in response to the surge in interest in analog photography. And apparently, they're considering making a brand new hand-winding manual camera. So it's not even going to be, one of the later model 35mm that, basically had the film advance automatic built in. Nope, this will be good old-fashioned manual advanced shutter release. And obviously, they're trying to appeal to the younger film enthusiasts. I will say this. If they would just re-release the Pentax K1000 camera, I sincerely believe it would sell like wildfire. And I'll tell you what, I'd be one of the first people to buy one in a heartbeat. It was such an awesome little camera because it was about as basic as they come. It was as simple as they come. And there was nothing about that camera that gets in the way of photography. That's a camera, you don't need a camera manual to learn how to use it. You can pick that sucker up and you can take pictures. It's simple, it's easy, it was just amazing little camera. So my hope for them is that's the direction they're going. But to me, heck, they don't need to invent anything. Just go back and re-release that camera. So some other news, some teaching updates for you. So one thing, not happy to tell you about this, but I need to let you know this. I've been telling all of you about Texas School for quite a while. It's coming up April 23rd through the 28th, so it's about a month from now. I am very sorry to inform you, I will not be teaching at Texas School as planned. Look, sometimes this happens. Unfortunately, things just didn't work out in a way that was beneficial for both parties. But hey, maybe in the future, you never know. I will tell you, though, if you're able to take a week off and you can make it to Dallas, Texas, this is a 5-day program where you work with one instructor the entire week. And the cost is ridiculously inexpensive. $750 for the whole week of instruction. Those of you, if you're listening, that were already signed up for my program, you should have heard from the folks at Texas School by now about selecting a new class. I will be reaching out to you tomorrow personally, also with a follow-up. But unfortunately, sometimes business is business and it just doesn't work. Next up on my calendar, you'll see on my website here, actually the one that I want to tell you about, April 11th. This is one that a lot of you are probably in denial, thinking, oh, I don't know that I really need this, but a lot of you probably do. Best practices for digital file management for photographers. In other words, here's the bottom line. I got my first professional digital camera in the year 2000, the Nikon D1. That means I have now been shooting digital professionally for 23 years. I am not joking. I am not embellishing. I can find any image I have shot in the last 23 years in less than 3 minutes. I have an excellent filing system. It is what information architecture people refer to as a hierarchical folder-based system. Yes, I'm a nerd. So, obviously, I'm not just going to share my system. I am going to share ideas, information, processes for all of you to understand how can you create a filing system that's going to work, that you're going to be able to find stuff that easy. And it doesn't have to be a folder-based filing system. It may be a non-hierarchical system or keyword-based system. But I break all that down. I even help you with the challenge of what do you do with a really bad filing system that you already have, because it could take you months, if not years, to go back through all those files and reorganize. I've got solutions for that. So anyway, to sign up for that class, you can find the link underneath this video. I'll also drop it in the chat before you have it. This program will probably only be offered one time this year. So this is it. It's coming up. The price of admission, $10. It's a 2-hour program. 24 hours after the presentation, you get an email with a digital download, which is kind of a cool cheat sheet for the whole thing, but also the video replay for up to 72 hours. So if for some reason you can't make it live, and believe me, that's where the real value is, because you can ask questions during the live presentation. But if you can't make it live, you can still sign up, register. The very next day, you'll get the download link with the video replay. The video will replay for 72 hours afterwards. So you'll still have the opportunity to be able to watch through it, and you'll have the PDF cheat sheet that you get to keep as well, okay? All right, so that's what's coming up there. Now, let's go ahead and let's hit the image breakdown really quick, and then we'll get into Q&A. I think I saw one or two questions come in, and I have one question waiting for me, but go on, you're here. How are we going to help you tonight, right? So the question that is on the cover tonight, this actually is a little bit of an older shot for me. This was done in 2017, and I picked this just because this past weekend, you may recall I was down in Austin, Texas, at Precision Camera, and did a workshop there. And we were doing a lot of mixed light stuff. We didn't have any strobes for the workshop, but we were mixing LED lights. We were working with Nan lights, which is the first time I've gotten to play with them. The Pavo tubes from Nan Light, really cool. Higher end, higher priced, but really, really awesome. Gorgeous color, especially for the RGB lights. So anyway, that just kind of made me think about this shot, since it's a mix of some, inexpensive LED and strobe. So I thought I would use this for the breakdown. And this was a case where obviously the halo above her head, it's a ring light. It's an inexpensive Savage Universal ring light. But I decided to use it as a prop in the picture, and then also created lighting with strobes that would make it look like, I want to make sure you can see my mouse. Yes, you can see my mouse. That would make it look like this ring light was creating the extra light on her shoulders. The ring light has little to no impact on this shot whatsoever. I actually have the ring light dialed down a lot because I didn't want to get any kind of glow or light bleed from it. And I also didn't want it lighting my subject's face. So the cheat here is that I basically lit this shot as if there was no ring light. Added the ring light, which is mounted on a stand behind her, and it comes up, and I'll show you the lighting diagram in a moment, and then just turned the power way down. The only thing I was concerned with is I wanted to make sure that there was enough light coming from it that it stayed white and didn't turn gray. For those of you that follow along with these every week, you should probably have figured out by now that the streaks of light that you're seeing in the background, that's just an overlay. Real simple, okay? So what I'll actually show you here first, let me switch out to this, okay? So I often talk about the idea, number one, of work your shot, and number two, the idea that, hey, as a digital photographer, if you're going to shoot 1 or 2 frames, why bother? You're not that good. Just keeping it real, not trying to insult anybody. I'm not that good. Nobody's that good. So I want to give you an example of this particular shoot, how I broke it down, and this is every frame that was shot. In all likelihood, I did drop out probably a couple test frames in the very, very beginning. And there might have been 1 or 2 when I switched from this yellow setup to the pink down here. But beyond that, this is the shoot. So I want you, number one, to see and understand the consistency that's here. This is important because this is what you're striving for. But I also want you to notice that basically as we go through these sets, the hair and the makeup are essentially the same. The only difference being when we get to the kind of pinkish purple top at the end, we added some additional details, which are the little jewel pieces above her eyes. And then as we got further to the end, we added a couple more pieces, but not much, to dress it up. So basically, these are all variations working from essentially the same setup. And for the most part, from beginning to end, obviously, if you look at these first couple shots, you can see the larger one above me, right? This is basically one light. right? She's sitting right in front of a black background. Even though it looks kind of gray, that's because she's literally right in front of it. So essentially, you know, it's one round key light above the camera aimed down at her, and I'm even leaving the shadow in the shot because it's not a hard shadow, it's a soft shadow, right? Then as I get down here a little further and go with a little bit more of a traditional look, now I've separated her from the background and I've got a background light, so it's still, we're at 2 lights now. The background light's creating the glow. It's still a black background, right? So I'm, you know, essentially overexposing a little bit. Then it's simply a matter of adding the gel, okay? Getting the color. Then same exact setup, but I've added 2 things. One, a blue gel instead of a yellow, and I've added a rim light on camera left. You can see the yellow light that's coming in on her face, okay? And still working with the same setup, but now by the time I get down to here, I'm feeling like it's not going where I want it to go. The problem that I had was I didn't have an end game in mind for this particular session. Didn't have an end game. So I had some nice shots. They were okay, but nothing super exciting. And I was kind of very fortunate. Literally, it was one of those things that just popped into my head. It's like, oh, you know what? Let's go grab that ring light back here. You can see there's a test shot where I got it way too bright. You see how it glows? I didn't want the glow. So, you know, turned it down a little. It's a little better. And eventually turned it way down so there's no glow, right? Started out with it basically a vertical frame behind her and then wound up kind of bending it over so that it was almost like a halo above her head. So the setup for this shot, and again, my 10-foot circle, because the 10-foot circle works, and while I don't measure out a 10-foot circle every time, that's basically the space that I work in for most of these kinds of shots, right? It's really pretty much that simple. So when we get to the final shot, we're working with 4 lights, right? We've got key light, slightly to camera right and above, and just to give you a sense of the height, as I often do, the bottom of the box is right around the bottom of her chin-ish, right? I don't measure it. I don't stress over that exact point, but it's never too high, never too low, especially not where I'm going to start to get top shadows. We don't want top shadows, right? The ring light is on a stand behind her, just bent forward, right? The background light with the blue gel is creating the glow, and then the 2 rim lights with amber CTOs on them to create the highlighting on the shoulder. Unfortunately, this pink is a little bit brighter than what's actually in the picture. In fact, here, let me see if I can make it a little darker. That way it'll look a little bit more realistic to what we have in the finished picture. Yeah, so we'll come kind of down into there. So those rim lights are creating that little bit of highlighting, so it looks like that highlighting's coming from the ring light. So that's the setup. Advanced in the sense that, yeah, it got up to 4 lights. That's, you know, Joe being nerdy, but we could actually take these rim lights out. Oops, leave the background in. Let's see, did I turn those off or not here? Let's turn that off, and let's turn that off. You know, we still got similarly the same picture, just with 2 lights. And then again, the overlay are the black streaks that are emanating from the shot here. Let me grab that back for you. There we go. So that part's an overlay over top of that blue, just to give it a little bit more sense of depth and kind of pizzazz. All right? Okay, so that's all of my stuff. Now, one question that I had here. Let me scroll down. This came in. This is another one of those ones. I get myself in trouble here, but let me just make sure that I didn't miss any of your questions. Let's see. Eric's here tonight. Hey, Eric. So one of the highlights of my trip this past weekend to Austin, Texas, low lights and highlights. Low lights, 3 o'clock in the morning, last Friday morning, I get a message. My flight was canceled. I was supposed to be on an 8:45 flight that was going to get me into Austin, Texas at noon. So at 3 o'clock in the morning, I'm trying to rebook my flight. I managed to get an earlier flight out of Philadelphia, but in order to get to Austin, I had to fly from Philadelphia to Las Vegas, spend 5 hours in Las Vegas, which turned into 6 hours, and then fly from there to Austin. So I got into Austin late Friday night, which fortunately I didn't have to do anything until Saturday. Saturday morning, I did a presentation at Precision Camera at their store, which, by the way, it's not on my website yet, gang, but for those of you down in Texas, I'm likely going to be back at Precision Camera June 1st and 2nd. They're doing their Precision Camera Photo Expo, which they do every year, which is an awesome event. I've been there before. I'll be doing a keynote presentation on Thursday evening, June 1st, and then a workshop shooting my cool fashion and beauty stuff with a makeup artist and all the foo-foo. We'll be doing that on Friday the 2nd, right? But in the afternoon, we did the event at the Q2 Stadium, and it was kind of cool. So we actually stayed inside. We shot in a bar in the stadium for most of the day, but it was, absolutely awesome. But Eric is also, he's been part of my mentoring program in the past, and he's in my Tog Knowledge community. So we grabbed dinner after the event, and we're sitting eating dinner in a section of Austin called the Domain, which is this kind of cool shopping district of that. And at the table right next to us, in comes Patrick Renna and sits down to have dinner. So if you don't know who Patrick Renna is, you can Google him, but I will tell you, if you've ever seen the movie The Sandlot, he was the chubby, red-headed catcher in the movie The Sandlot. So it's actually kind of, really cool, because he still looks exactly the same, hasn't changed at all, except he's considerably older now. But yes, it was very cool getting to see him in Austin, Texas. So the question that I got, this was from my Facebook group, and this was from a relatively new photographer. So I'm going to go easy on my response. Because I know this person is really kind of just getting into things, right? But the question was from Mary, and it was about the idea of aperture priority or shutter priority. They seem to be a lot easier than shooting manual. So which one should I shoot? Okay. So Mary, here's the challenge. I have to give you two options, and neither of them include aperture priority or shutter priority. Also, by the way, folks, Mary does use a mirrorless camera. She's not shooting DSLRs or film. She's on a mirrorless camera. So here are the two options. Number one, and this first option, I would encourage you, Mary, to work on no matter what, because it will help you build a more solid foundation and a better understanding of what you're doing with your camera. So look, you don't have to kill yourself. You don't have to take all the fun out of your photography in the meantime, but you should learn it. And that is simply to shoot manual, right? It is to learn the relationships between aperture, shutter speed, and the brightness setting, which is called ISO. It's very important to learn those relationships and learn how they work. Now, there was a time, not that long ago, that many photographers, myself included, would have said, you have to learn to shoot manual. It's the only option. And by the way, the reason for that is that anytime you include the word auto in your settings, you run the risk of not paying attention, not noticing that the camera is not giving you the result that you want, and then, of course, taking a lot of pictures that are not going to turn out the way you wanted at all, which of course is very problematic. So, I always like to say auto is the 4-letter word for forget about it, right? Because you set it on auto and then you tend to forget to check your settings. So the nice part of it is with the mirrorless camera, of course, when we look through the EVF, the electronic viewfinder, we're seeing the finished image. Especially, if you're out and about. If you're shooting in a studio, it's a little bit different, but Mary's not shooting in a studio yet. So the problem with aperture priority or shutter priority is you are letting the camera take care of two settings instead of 1. So if you pick aperture priority, you're selecting an aperture, but you are letting the camera not only take care of your shutter speed, but also your brightness. The problem with that plan is that you have to pay really close attention then, not only to the overall brightness of your image to make sure that the camera's meter is reading your scene properly and interpreting it the way that you want it, but you also have to pay attention to the idea that it's not using a shutter speed that is too slow, meaning possibly introducing camera motion into the scene, or for that matter, subject motion. It could be something as simple as trying to photograph a flower, but the wind is blowing and it's breezy. You could wind up with motion in your image. Shutter priority, similarly, you're picking the shutter speed, but then you are allowing the camera to pick the aperture and the brightness, the ISO setting. Same kind of scenario. If it winds up picking an aperture that is, let's say, wide open, very shallow depth of field, you may be dealing with a situation where you're not getting as many things in the frame that you want in focus as is ideal. Now, there will be photographers with old school thinking that will argue before I go any further, say, but I can do exposure compensation any way it goes, so it's all the same, Joe. No, it's not. Because with aperture priority and shutter priority, you are allowing the camera to control 2 of your settings. So what I recommend, Mary, is that you do auto ISO. If you want to automate part of the process, do auto ISO. So let me explain what that does for you, and then I'll explain to you how you go about using it. And I'm going to give you a little phrase, a quote to remember that will help you every time you go to set your camera to take pictures. So with auto ISO, you select the aperture, the lens opening, you select the shutter speed, and then you allow the camera to adjust the brightness to match the settings that you have decided upon, right? It's going to do that with that ISO setting, which in a digital mirrorless camera is nothing more than light or dark. It is not sensitivity, it is light and dark. By doing that, yes, you have to do one more setting than if you were working on aperture or shutter, but you are ensuring that you are taking care of the 2 most important settings. The setting that is going to ensure that things aren't blurry because of motion, and the setting that is going to ensure that things aren't blurry because there's not enough depth in the image. Now, there are some people who will balk at that because they haven't really learned how to use the mirrorless cameras yet. And they're going to think back to the early days of DSLR cameras and think, but if I use auto ISO, there's a risk that my camera starts shooting at 3200 ISO or some crazy number. And they're not wrong, but it's not really a risk. Because the cameras that shoot auto ISO also allow you, in the menu system, if you read your manual, to cap that ISO setting. In other words, to set a maximum ISO so that your camera will not go beyond that at any point in time. So if you've picked an aperture and shutter speed combination and the camera hits that cap, but there's not enough light, you're still going to see a dark picture, a really dark picture. It's not going to get you where you want to go. At that point, you will have to make a conscious decision. Am I going to go with a wider lens opening to allow more light in? Or do I keep the lens opening and go to a slower shutter speed to allow more light in? Or do you do a combination of both? Right? So it basically will force you to deal with the problem. So how do you figure out where you should cap it? And then I'll get to the quote. I didn't forget the quote, right? The way you figure out where you should cap it is a little test. I like to call it ISO tolerance. This is not a thing. You're not going to read this in books anywhere. This is totally something that I recommend people do. I've done it. I did it with my Olympus cameras. I have done it with my Sony cameras. And it works. It simply works. And that is put a clean disc in your camera. In other words, no images on it. And if you have a tripod, use a tripod. But if you don't, put your camera on a table or a chair, right? A camera support, so that all the pictures are going to be of the same thing, right? And then you're going to take a whole string of pictures. The first string are going to be, well, actually, sorry, let me back up here. The first thing you're going to do is you're going to set the camera up so that you are shooting at the camera's base ISO. So you can find out in the manual what that is, or you can go to websites like, either the manufacturer's website, or you can go to like B&H or Adorama, and in the specs, it'll tell you what the base ISO is, right? So start out at your camera's base ISO. What is base ISO? That is the actual sensitivity of your camera's sensor. Every other ISO setting, the reason I keep calling it brightness, that's actually what it is. Every other ISO setting is your camera's software interpreting that level of sensitivity. But your camera sensor only has one level of sensitivity, just like film did, right? None of that changed. So they kept the ISO thing because they knew that photographers are stubborn and they get scared easy, and they knew that if they came up with some other setting and they called it gain, it would be one more reason why film photographers would be whining and complaining and saying, oh, digital, it's horrible, it's this, it's that, and they wouldn't consider it. So they kept the settings exactly the same. But in order to figure out what your tolerance is you're going to start at your base ISO, figure out what the exposure is for whatever is in front of your camera. And look, it could be your kitchen. It doesn't matter what it is. Figure out what the exposure is. Get a good exposure. Now, from there, you are going to raise your ISO. Let's say that your base ISO is 100. So then you're going to go to 200. And you're going to adjust either your lens opening or your shutter speed so that the picture is still the same brightness. Then you're going to go to ISO 400. Adjust your lens opening or shutter speed so you keep the picture the same brightness. 800, 1600, etc. And then you're also going to go the other way down to 64 and 50. The idea is when you take the pictures out of your camera and put them in the computer, they are all going to be exactly the same brightness. The depth of field will change, right? But that's okay. This is for you to be able to figure out ISO tolerance. Then what you're going to do in Lightroom or Bridge or Luminar, whatever program you use to cull through your images, you're going to go through the images one at a time at 100%. Not 200, not 500. We're not blowing them up massive, just 100% on your computer screen. And you're basically looking to see at what point does the noise bother me? At what point do I find it objectionable? Do I find that it's ruining my photo? Now, look, there are some people, they, for some reason, have gotten to the point that even the slightest hint of noise, can't have that. Well, okay, if that's you, but you're just limiting yourself, right? For me, I like a little texture in my file. I don't have a problem going up quite high with my ISO, but there is a breaking point where beyond that, I don't really like the way it looks, and I will only use it in situations of desperation. But once I know what that number is, in the case of my cameras, it's actually 12,000. Once I know what that number is, I'm going to set that number as the cap. That way, the camera can never go above that setting, that 12,000 ISO, without me realizing, hey, there's a problem. I need to make other accommodations to get there. And then I have the ability to decide, well, you know what? This shutter speed and this lens opening combination are important. I'm going to have to raise my ISO. Or I can say, nope, I'm not going to let my ISO go any higher, so I'm going to adjust my aperture or my shutter speed, right? So that's how you figure out your tolerance. That's the exercise that you want to do. And then when you're taking pictures going forward, assuming that you're working on auto ISO, here is the quote that I would encourage you to kind of jot down and honestly commit it to memory because it's a good way to remember it. When you're taking pictures, choose your shutter speed with purpose and your aperture with emotion. And then use your ISO to make your photo lighter or darker. Choose your shutter speed with purpose, your aperture with emotion. Use your ISO to make your photograph lighter or darker. So let's break that down. Shutter speed is a purpose-driven setting 99% of the time. Certainly, there are some techniques like shutter drag that you may do that are creative techniques where you're kind of breaking all the rules, right? But for all intents and purposes, the overwhelming majority that any photographer is going to do, a shutter speed is a purposeful setting. Most importantly, it is preventing motion, whether it be subject motion or camera motion. Or the flip side is it may be allowing some motion, but we want that to be intentional. So you pick your shutter speed with a purpose, right? The other types of things that will impact your shutter speed, motion that's going across your frame requires a faster shutter speed than motion that's coming towards you or going away from you. Because the perception of motion is much faster this way than it is this way, right? So you need a faster shutter speed. Also, the size and the weight and the length of your lens, focal length, not physical length, but focal length of your lens. A good rule of thumb, so a rule of thumb is just a suggestion. It's a guideline. Let's face it, rule of thumbs are the kinds of things that help you make sure you don't get in trouble, but they're also not a law, right? So a good rule of thumb for lenses and shutter speeds is to not use a shutter speed that is slower than the focal length of your lens. And when in doubt, round up. So what do I mean by that? So for instance, let's say you're using a 50 millimeter lens. So ideally, you don't want to use a shutter speed that is less than 1/50th of a second. Well, most cameras don't have a 1/50th. They go from 60th to 30, unless you've got them set for thirds and that. But so you could shoot at a 60th of a second. You round up. If you are using a 100 millimeter lens, then ideally 1/125th of a second is the slowest speed that you want to handheld. That is a good habit so that you are not likely to introduce motion with your own jerky movements. Okay, so again, not a rule, not the end of the world, but believe me, it's saved my butt plenty of times. And I'm also a big fan of all this great image stabilization that we have in cameras today. I don't rely on it. Now, let me be clear. It's turned on. It's turned on all the time. Even on a tripod, it's turned on, okay? But I like to consider the image stabilization to be my plan B, meaning I'm the one responsible for keeping the camera steady. In the event that I maybe make a mistake, I am relying on the image stabilization to cover me. CYA, cover your, that, right, okay? So, but beyond that, I'm not going to rely on the image stabilization. I love the fact that our cameras are computers. I love the fact that they can do so much for us. But at the end of the day, the camera doesn't actually know what I'm doing. And it doesn't know what I'm thinking. And it doesn't know what I'm imagining for a shot. So I am not willing to just give up my control and let the camera do everything. It's bad enough, my eyesight is bad enough at this point in my life that I have to rely on autofocus to be able to focus the camera, right? But when it comes to anything that's going to have impact on the creative elements of the shot and the overall look and feel, then I want to be in control of that, right? So I'm not saying don't use image stabilization. I'm just saying, hey, don't get lazy, because that's kind of like, you know, an auto thing, right? Auto is the 4-letter word for forget about it. If you just turn on your image stabilization, it's like, oh, it'll cover my butt. I don't have to worry about my shutter speeds. Oh, yeah, you're wrong. It will eventually bite you in the butt, right? It just will. So that was a long answer, Mary, but hopefully that helped. And if you have more questions, feel free to follow up with me next week here or post the questions in the group. But again, Annie, I see your comment. I love that. Choose your shutter speed with purpose. I've lost my mojo for so long now. I needed to hear this video. Thank you for it. Well, Andy, first of all, I appreciate that. And yeah, I mean, that's kind of really what it comes down to. You know, there are, and look, I'll tell you right now, Andy, if you talk to 10 photographers, you'll probably get 10 different variations on this. So anytime somebody tells you something differently, Just tell them they don't know. No, don't tell them they don't know what I'm talking about. I'm kidding. The first thing to do is ask, hey, do you shoot DSLR or do you shoot mirrorless? Because for DSLR shooters, some of the old rules still apply and still make a lot more sense, right? They just do. And so I totally get that. But for mirrorless camera shooters, we have a problem in our industry. And I know I'm swimming upstream with this, but it's okay. Somebody's got to do it, right? Mirrorless cameras are incredibly different than DSLRs and film cameras. But yet we still teach all the same stuff in photography. We still talk about it all the same way. We still use all the same values and guidelines and rules. And look, I'm sorry, but it's time to start rethinking the process. When you've got a camera that is showing you your finished image before, during, and after you pressing the button, there's never been a better time to actually embrace some automatic. So let me be clear, when I talk about using auto ISO, my Sony camera, in fact, here, it's right here. I use two different model Sony cameras, and most cameras have, well, all cameras have this feature. It's just a question of where they have it. So part of the reason why I picked the Sony cameras is since it's a mirrorless camera, and when I'm on ISO, and by the way, this is when I'm out on location, not in the studio, I have my thumb not on the shutter speed dial on the back, but on the exposure compensation dial. So if the picture's a little light, I just go ahead and I hit it over to the minus side. If it's a little dark, I go to the plus side. But so basically the entire time I'm taking pictures, I can run that wheel with my thumb. It's right there. And so what I'm talking about, if I get the camera to focus, whoops, I got to be able to touch it too. So this outside button right there, okay, that's the exposure compensation. That's the shutter speed. So I'm able to ride that the entire time. So it's just so much simpler. It's so much easier. And it's still forcing me, because again, for years, I was one of those photographers, work in manual, no automatic, because that was the only way to be sure. That's not the case now, right? With DSLRs, you still have to take the picture and then look, which is still a ton better than film, where you took the picture, sent it away, and then waited 7 days to find out how much you sucked, right? So yeah, it's time that we, Joe Doozle, cover your aperture. There you go. It's not what I meant, but yeah, that's good. Well, I'll take that one. Anyway, it's one of those things. It's time that we reevaluate some of these guidelines, and we realize that our cameras have progressed much further than we have as an industry, as photographers. I think that's awesome. I think it's so awesome. But that would be my advice to you, okay? TC, your message to new photographers is very helpful. This 72-year-old, been a picture taker for 50 years. Well, I'm glad it's helpful. And definitely, as this technology changes, I mean, gang, look, I don't care if you're young or old, I think right now, today in history, you know, where are we at? March 22nd, 2023. I think this is honestly potentially the most exciting time in history to be a photographer. And let me be clear, I think it's the most exciting time, not just because of the cameras and lenses that we have, but indeed because of AI, because of all this amazing software technology that we have. I mean, I get it, gang. It can be overwhelming, right? Especially for some of you that are beginners, that are, you know, trying to learn all this stuff, and it's changing almost weekly, and there's new stuff coming at us like crazy. It can be overwhelming. It helps maybe to be a little bit nerdy like me, and I find it interesting. But here's why I nerd out about it, and here's why I find it interesting. Because it's opportunity. It's opportunity to create different, to do different things, to explore new possibilities, right? And so I'm not telling you, hey, you got to think that way. I'm not telling you, hey, you have to do that. Just like I said, you know, for some people, losing DP review really is a horrible thing, because for them, their pleasure is in the gear. And for those people, I respect them for that purpose, right? But for me, I think it's just incredible what we have to work with. So let me see here. I got some other questions, and I want to make sure I get to everybody now that I'm running late. Where was the question? Nick, sometimes I'm able to sell a large nature print. I put a small real Sharpie signature in the corner. I add the year, but should it be the year of the sale or of the capture, if not the same? I'll be honest with you, Nick. I would say that whichever. So let me be clear. So obviously I don't do gallery type sales. Okay. I was just in Las Vegas a few weeks back, and I think pretty much every time I've ever gone to Las Vegas, I have made it a point very intentionally to walk into one of Peter Lick's galleries, because I don't care what kind of photography you shoot, because obviously I am not a nature and landscape person like Peter Lick is, but you can't not be in awe of his prints. Okay, and so this is a man, by the way, that holds the record for having sold 3 of the top 4 most expensive photographs ever sold for a total of in excess of $10 million. Okay. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, Nick, so look it up online and check, and maybe even check with some galleries or reach out to a gallery and just ask. I don't think Peter Lick signs the front of his work. I have no doubt his images are probably signed and back and probably come with very detailed certificates of authenticity and edition numbers and that kind of stuff for the kind of money that, he charges. I would expect that they do, but I don't think he signs the front. So since I'm not an expert, I'm just throwing some things out there for you to think about. And I would say to you, honestly, just reach out to a gallery that deals in photography, not, other mediums, right? And ask them what tends to be the most common. But again, and here's the thing, right? I will say this, and you've heard me say similar things before. If your work is good enough, you don't need your name on the front of it. You walk into a Peter Lick gallery, they're Peter Lick images. You don't have to see the sign above the door. You just take one look at those images, that they've got to be Peter Lick images, period. And these are nature, wildlife, landscape photographs, and even some street images now, some urban landscapes he's doing, which are like amazing. He's actually based in the US now, and just incredible stuff. They're his work. So, ultimately your goal as an artist is to make your work good enough that people know your work. So sure, it needs to be signed, but I'm still a big believer, sign it on the back. Right? You sign it on the front, you're taking away from people's enjoyment of the image and their ability to experience the entire image. I know for years, for decades, a lot of photographers sign the front or they put a watermark on it, but that doesn't make it right. It just means that's what people been doing. So check with the gallery. That would be the best bet. Okay. Let's see. Lane, on the photos you were showing, the neck piece you used was just a piece of fabric you had with you. Yeah, Lane, that's absolutely correct. So here's a shot. Let me get his quote off the screen here and I'll show you. When I go to the fabric stores, in every fabric store you go into, they have a section called trim. So, of course, you got the sections with all the bolts of material and fabric, right? But then they have a section called trim. And that's literally just a piece of trim that you usually get like 1 or 2 feet of it. And then just wrap it around the model's neck and clip it in the back, literally with like an A-clamp, a plastic A-clamp. So it's not the super heavy ones, but a plastic A-clamp. And that's all that is. Probably 80% of the time when you see some kind of a collar on my models, it's a piece of trim. And it might be upholstery trim, it may be curtain trim, it could be trim that was meant for the edge of a dress or like, sleeves or cuffs. But yeah, you find it in the trim section is where you can get it. So anytime you're looking to kind of dress stuff up, gang, yeah, go to the trim section. And better yet, be smart. When you go to the stores, go to the clearance section first, because in the clearance, you'll find like remnant pieces. So you'll find stuff that's like 12 inches long, 16 inches long, 18 inches long, and you pay like $1 for it, which is awesome. Now, you know, sometimes you get to that section and it's junk, right? But other times, yeah, you'll find really good finds in there, because the stuff that looks good as if it were an outfit or a piece of jewelry doesn't necessarily look good on a piece of clothing, right? And vice versa. So yeah, it's worth checking out. Okay? All right, gang, so we are out of time. Thank you for watching. And always, I hope you found some value with what I shared with you tonight. Remember, please, hitting a thumbs up helps other people find out about the show. And remember, you don't get back the days that you waste. So please, go pick up that camera and shoot something, because your next shot, it's your best shot. Do the work, gang. Adios. Take care.